Hi, I'm Ramona, I'm 67 years old, and this is the story of the moment everything changed. It was last Tuesday night. We were having dinner, or trying to. My daughter-in-law, Lennox, looked up from her plate and said, "Your voice is grating. Could you eat in your room, please?" I didn't argue. I just nodded and picked up my plate. My hands were shaking, not from age, but from hurt. I climbed the stairs slowly, tears already burning the edges of my eyes. That night, I ate my meal in silence, alone in my bedroom. And the next morning? I canceled the loan I'd quietly been preparing to give her to help fund her business. I'm so glad you're here. This is just the beginning. Stick with me to the end of my story, and tell me where you're watching from in the comments so I can see how far this story travels. That evening had started like any other. I was seated at the dining table, the same one my late husband, Harold, and I bought when we moved into this house 43 years ago. A table filled with memories, birthdays, anniversaries, nights spent helping Darren with his homework. But that night, in front of my 34-year-old son and his wife, I became a stranger in my own home. Darren didn't look up. He just kept slicing his steak, eyes focused on his plate, pretending not to hear. He always went quiet when Lennox decided to humiliate me. The silence between us stretched long and heavy. I finally pushed my chair back. "Of course," I murmured. "I'll finish upstairs." I stood, holding my plate like it weighed 100 pounds. My dignity was heavier. Lennox gave me that same icy little smirk she wore every time she came out on top. "Thanks, Ramona. We just need a little peace and quiet to go over some business stuff." Business? The irony wasn't lost on me. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard them talking in hushed tones, probably mapping out their next vacation or planning the future of Lennox's struggling cosmetics startup. I sat on the edge of my bed and tried to eat. The meatloaf I'd spent 2 hours cooking tasted like sand in my mouth. At first, a few tears slipped down my cheeks. Then more. Until my shoulders shook and I couldn't pretend anymore. It wasn't the first time Lennox had treated me like a nuisance, like a guest overstaying her welcome. But something about tonight felt final. 3 years. That's how long I'd been walking on eggshells in my own home. She moved in just 6 months after they got married. Said they were saving up for their future. What she really meant was, she wanted control. And she got it, by slowly turning my son against me, one seemingly harmless comment at a time. "Your mom babies you too much. She always needs to be the center of attention, doesn't she? She means well, Darren, but she just doesn't know when to back off." Each subtle jab disguised with a syrupy smile, each seed of doubt planted so carefully. At first, I tried to explain. Tried to defend myself. But every time I did, Darren looked more and more tired. "Can't you just get along with her, Mom? Why does everything have to be so hard with you?" Eventually, I stopped speaking up. I began apologizing, for cooking meals he used to love without asking her permission, for mentioning stories from his childhood, for existing in a way that upset Lennox. And Harold? He'd be heartbroken if he saw how I'd let them treat me. My husband never tolerated disrespect. Never backed down. But Harold didn't know what it meant to risk losing your only child. After he passed 8 years ago, Darren became my entire world. Every ounce of energy I had went into making sure he was okay. So when he brought Lennox home, I was grateful. I would have welcomed anyone who made him happy. But I didn't realize she saw me as competition, not family. And that's what hurt the most. Not the constant criticisms or the backhanded remarks. But the slow collapse of my relationship with my son. The boy who used to call me just to hear my voice now avoided phone calls altogether. The man who once asked my advice on everything now acted like my thoughts had no value. That night, alone in my room with a cold plate of food and tears I couldn't stop, something inside me shifted. I was done being invisible. Done being polite. What Lennox didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I held far more power than they thought. The next morning, I called my attorney. Not because I planned to make some big dramatic move, but because Harold had always reminded me to review our finances every year. It was something I'd put off, partly because I was grieving, and partly because that had always been Harold's world, not mine. But I was ready now. "Mrs. Morrison, my lawyer, Robert Chen," said as I took a seat in his office. "I'm glad you came in. There are a few matters regarding the Montgomery Trust that require your attention." The Montgomery Trust. Harold had set it up years ago, named after his grandfather who started our family's construction business. I'd signed all the papers, but I never really paid attention to the fine print. Harold handled the numbers. I handled everything else. "What needs my attention?" I asked, taking the thick folder he slid across the desk. "Well," Robert said with a calm smile, "you're the sole trustee now. Which means all investment decisions, including any distributions, are entirely up to you." "The trust is performing remarkably well," Robert said, flipping open a thick binder. "As of now, it's valued at just over $2.8 million. I nearly dropped the folder in my hands. "I'm sorry, did you say 2.8 million? He nodded, calm and matter of fact. "That's correct. Your husband had a keen eye for investments. The portfolio has grown steadily over the years. In fact, those returns have been quietly funding a number of, let's call them, family-related endeavors." My pulse quickened. "What kind of endeavors?" Robert opened another section of the binder. "For starters, monthly wire transfers to a business called Luminous Beauty, LLC. If I'm not mistaken, that's your daughter-in-law's company?" I stared at him in disbelief. "Yes," I said slowly. "That's her cosmetic brand." He nodded again. "So far, the trust has funneled roughly $180,000 in startup capital into the company over the past year and a half, along with ongoing support of $15,000 per month." The room tilted slightly. I gripped the edge of the chair to steady myself. Lennox's company, the one she loved to boast about, the one she claimed she'd built from scratch and that no one believed in, was being bankrolled entirely by my husband's trust. A trust that I now controlled. "Does Darren know about this?" I asked, my voice unsteady. Robert flipped to a handwritten memo. "According to your husband's instructions, the support was meant to remain confidential. He believed the business should succeed on its own merits, without the family knowing or feeling indebted." Of course he did. Even in death, Harold was trying to protect Darren's ego, and Lennox's illusion of independence. But what he didn't foresee, couldn't have, was how they'd treat the woman he left behind. "What other allocations are there?" I asked, barely getting the words out. He skimmed down the sheet. "The trust has also been covering the annual property taxes and upkeep for this home, as well as the Lake Tahoe vacation property, about $4,000 monthly. There's also an education fund. It paid for your son's MBA a few years back and is currently covering Lennox's business certification courses." Each line hit like a slap. Every comfort they enjoyed, every opportunity they'd grasped, every success they claimed. All of it had been quietly funded by Harold's legacy, a legacy now managed by me. I took a breath. "Robert, what would happen if I decided to shift how these funds are used?" He tilted his head. "You're the sole trustee, Mrs. Morrison. You can reallocate the assets as you see fit, as long as it aligns with the trust's intended purpose, family support and philanthropic efforts. And if I were to stop funding certain ventures? That's within your rights. I'd just recommend 30 days notice for anything that affects recurring disbursements, to ensure a smooth transition." I sat in that chair for another hour, absorbing more than I had in years: account numbers, projected yields, legal obligations. Harold had built a quiet empire. And now it belonged to me. As I drove home, I felt something stirring inside me, not revenge, exactly, and not bitterness. It was clarity. A grounded, empowering sense of control. Not the icy kind Lennox wielded like a weapon, but a quiet, deep-rooted strength that only comes when you finally remember who you are. Darren's car was already in the driveway when I pulled up. Through the kitchen window, I saw him and Lennox sitting at the table, laptops open, papers scattered between them, planning their next big move, no doubt. Another expansion, another pitch deck, another chance to claim success on someone else's dime. They had no idea that dime had just been cut off. I walked into the house, past their buzzing little business meeting, and climbed the stairs to my room. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't tiptoeing. I was watching. That night, as I lay in bed and heard them cheering downstairs over some small business win, I made my decision. Harold had tried to help them while preserving their pride. But Harold had never been told to eat dinner alone in his own home. It was time they saw exactly who they'd been dismissing all this time. I waited exactly 1 week. 7 days of watching Lennox strut through my kitchen like she owned the deed, critiquing my clothes, my meals, my outdated opinions. 7 days of Darren bobbing his head like a wind-up toy, desperate to keep the peace at any cost, even if it meant losing his backbone. On Thursday morning, I called Robert. "I'd like to end all funding to Luminous Beauty," I said, calmly. "Effective immediately." He paused. "Are you sure, Mrs. Morrison? That will likely create serious cash flow issues for the business." "I'm sure," I replied. "Also, suspend the monthly property assistance. I'll handle those bills myself moving forward." The truth? I could cover them easily. Between Harold's pension and my own benefits, I'd be fine. The trust had only ever been a cushion, one that made life too easy for people who couldn't even offer me basic courtesy. Robert processed the paperwork that same day. By noon, the transfers had been terminated. Luminous Beauty's invisible safety net was gone. And they didn't have the faintest clue. I spent the rest of the day as usual, folding laundry, sweeping, making dinner, playing the harmless, invisible widow they believed I was. But inside? Inside, I was alive. Friday, the unraveling began. I was at the kitchen table, folding a stack of towels, when Lennox's voice rang out from across the room. "What do you mean the funding fell through? We had a signed agreement." She was pacing now, cell phone glued to her ear, brows furrowed in panic. "I don't understand. It was finalized last month. Where did it go?" She didn't even glance in my direction. I may as well have been a ghost. I quietly continued folding laundry, the corners of my mouth lifting, ever so slightly. "Let the games begin." She barked something curt into the phone and ended the call with a sharp tap. Then her eyes landed on me. "Ramona, did you catch any of that?" I looked up from the laundry with a mild smile. "Sorry, dear. I was focused on getting these stains out of Darren's shirts." "Everything all right?" She narrowed her eyes, studying me like she was trying to read between the lines, then waved it off. "Just business headaches. Nothing for you to concern yourself with. Nothing for me to worry about." If only she knew. By Monday, the tension was unmistakable. Panic had begun to sink its claws into her. I heard her all day, hopping from one phone call to another, banks, consultants, potential backers, anyone who might explain why her lifeline had suddenly vanished. She'd hang up hard, muttering about incompetent analysts and shady partners as she stalked through the house like a woman under siege. That evening, Darren walked in looking worn thin. Over dinner, which I served in the dining room, though they didn't invite me to join them, as usual, I caught pieces of their conversation through the open space between the kitchen and table. "The bank said someone flagged our accounts," Lennox said, stabbing at her salad like it had offended her. "They won't say who, but now everything's locked up while they investigate." "Investigate what?" Darren asked, frowning. "We haven't done anything illegal." "I know that," she snapped. "But apparently, someone raised concerns about where our money was coming from. They're demanding documentation for every deposit we've made in the last 2 years." I almost smiled. Robert had warned me this might happen. When large automatic transfers from a charitable trust suddenly disappear, banks tend to take notice, especially when those transfers are tax-shielded. Maybe Mom has some idea, Darren said after a pause. She's always been good with numbers. Lennox gave a sharp, dry laugh. Your mother? Darren, she barely knows how to work the microwave. What would she possibly know about financial portfolios? From the kitchen doorway, I saw my son's face fall slightly. He was starting to recognize the disdain in her voice, the way she belittled my existence without even realizing it. I just thought, maybe she'd have a suggestion, he said quietly. The only suggestion your mother ever has is how to make herself the center of attention, Lennox retorted. Remember last week when she tried to hijack our business dinner? Thank God I sent her upstairs before she embarrassed us in front of actual professionals. Embarrassed them. That was how she'd rewritten the evening she'd shamed me in front of their guests, where I had smiled, nodded, then quietly left the table like I'd been trained to. Darren didn't push back. But I saw it, a flicker of guilt as his eyes briefly shifted toward the kitchen. That night, I lay in bed with the lights off, listening as their voices rose behind the paper-thin walls. This doesn't make any sense, Darren said for the third time. Money doesn't just vanish. Someone has to know something. Well, it wasn't your precious mother, Lennox snapped. She can barely keep her own finances straight, let alone interfere with ours. Couldn't manage her own finances. Me, the woman who had quietly paid their mortgage, covered their bills, and bankrolled their dreams for the past 2 years. I pulled Harold's old pillow closer to my chest and smiled into the darkness. They thought I was feeble. Forgotten. Harmless. But they were about to learn just how wrong they'd been. Everything they'd taken for granted, every advantage, every step forward, had been built on the back of a woman they now treated like a nuisance. Tomorrow, I thought, it's time they felt what real pressure looks like. 2 weeks after I cut the funding, the transformation began. Lennox, once the epitome of polished poise, was unraveling. The edge in her voice was sharper now, her tone brittle, her patience wearing thin. The mask she'd worn for 3 years was slipping. And what lay beneath wasn't nearly as pretty. It started with small cracks. She snapped at the cashier when her card got declined at the grocery store. She barked orders on phone calls that ended in awkward silences. She began staring at me across the dinner table, her eyes narrowed like I was keeping secrets in my smile. She's been acting weird lately, I overheard her telling Darren one night while I stirred cream into their coffee. Haven't you noticed? Acting how? Darren asked, distracted. I don't know, off. Like she's watching us. Yesterday, she got to the mail before I did, and she's been asking odd questions about my client meetings. I hadn't touched the mail. I hadn't asked a thing about her meetings. But when someone's paranoid, even shadows start to look like enemies. What had changed wasn't my behavior, it was my silence. I didn't flinch when she snapped. I didn't apologize for walking through my own house. After years of invisibility, even the smallest shift felt like a revolution. But in one way, she was right. I had changed. For the first time since Harold passed, I had a reason to rise in the morning, something more than just survival. The real collapse came in week 3. Lennox had burned through her list of potential investors, and she was now chasing long shots, cold calls and introductions from old acquaintances she'd once dismissed. The problem was, real investors ask real questions. Where did your seed money come from? Do you have letters of reference from previous backers? Can you verify your financial history? Questions she couldn't answer. Because she never knew who had been funding her all along. I was standing at the sink, rinsing dishes, when I heard her voice float in from the next room, tense and overly polite. Yes, of course, I understand you need documentation, she said, that forced sweetness clinging to every syllable. It's just that, our original investor chose to remain anonymous. I wiped my hands on a towel, took a deep breath, and smiled. Anonymous, indeed. Everything was coordinated through middlemen. A pause. No, I don't have any direct contacts for those intermediaries. All arrangements were made via family connections. Another, longer silence followed. When she spoke again, the forced sweetness in her voice had vanished. What do you mean? That sounds off. This is a legitimate business with actual products and real customers. The call ended harshly. I knew it from the way she slammed down the phone and immediately began dialing again. That evening, she cornered Darren in their bedroom. I was in the bathroom down the hall, but their voices traveled clearly through the thin walls. We need to ask your mother for a loan, Lennox said. A loan? Mom doesn't have that kind of money. How do you know? She's lived in this house for 40 years. Your father worked in construction management. They must have savings. Mom lives on Social Security and Dad's pension. She clips coupons and shops at thrift stores. Then we'll ask her to co-sign a business loan. Banks trust older homeowners. I gripped the bathroom sink, a cold rage settling deep in my chest. After 3 years of treating me like an unwanted guest, after telling me my voice grated on their nerves, after countless small humiliations and dismissals, now they wanted to leverage my credit, my reputation, my home as collateral for their sinking business. The business that had been thriving because of my money all along. I don't know, Darren said quietly. Mom's been through a lot since Dad died. I don't want to stress her with business problems. Stress her out? Lennox's voice sharpened. Darren, this is our future we're talking about, our life together. If Luminous Beauty fails, we lose everything. Maybe we could move out, get our own place. That would take some pressure off Mom and lower expenses. Move out? Lennox's tone rose to a near scream. This house is perfect for entertaining clients. The address alone opens doors. And your mother loves having us here. We're doing her a favor by keeping her company. A favor. Living in my house. Eating my food. Being sent away from my own dinner table. All favors they were doing for poor, lonely me. I finished in the bathroom and slipped quietly to my bedroom, but I could still hear Lennox wearing Darren down, like she always did. She owes us this much, Lennox was saying. After everything we've sacrificed to care for her. Do you know how many social events I've missed because I couldn't leave her alone? How many business dinners we've hosted here instead of going out because someone has to keep an eye on her? Each lie was a tiny stab, but I was numb to the pain. What hit me harder was how easily Darren was starting to buy her story, the version where they were the caretakers sacrificing their freedom for a helpless old woman. By morning, Darren was convinced. He knocked on my bedroom door as I was getting dressed, something he hadn't done in months. Mom, can we talk? I opened the door to find my son looking uneasy, the same way he did when he was 12 and had broken something precious. Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind? It's about Lennox's business. They're struggling right now, and we were wondering. I mean, we thought maybe you could help. Help how? Well, if you could co-sign a small business loan. Just temporarily, until they get back on their feet. I looked into his eyes and saw the little boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers. The same little boy now asking me to risk my home to save the business I'd secretly been funding for 2 years. How much are we talking about? I asked softly. Maybe 50,000, 60 at the most. Such a tiny sum compared to what I'd already given them. But they had no idea, and their ignorance had become my power. Let me think about it, I said. This is a big decision. Darren's face brightened with relief. Really? You'll consider it? I'll consider it. What I was really weighing was how far I was willing to let them fall before deciding if I'd catch them. I told them I needed a week to decide. What I truly needed was time to gather the information that would change everything. On Wednesday morning, while Darren was at work and Lennox claimed to be tied up in an important client meeting, I drove to a quiet little cafe downtown. That's where I was meeting someone who'd been quietly observing my family's situation with growing unease. Margaret Chen, Robert's wife, had worked as Harold's secretary for 15 years before his retirement. She'd helped him set up the Montgomery Trust and stayed in touch with me after Harold passed, checking in now and then to see how I was holding up. "Ramona," she said as she slid into the booth across from me, "you look healthier than you have in months." "I feel better," I admitted, though I wasn't sure how long it would last. Margaret had called me 2 days earlier with information she believed I needed to hear, details about Lennox that explained so much of the last 3 years. "Tell me what you found," I said, clutching my coffee cup like it was a lifeline. She pulled out a folder and glanced around nervously, making sure no one nearby could overhear us. "I wasn't sure if I should share this," she said quietly, "but after what you told me about how they've been treating you." Inside the folder were printed emails, bank statements, and what looked like court documents. "Lennox hasn't been completely truthful about her past," Margaret said carefully. "This isn't her first marriage." My stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" "She was married before, to a man named Richard Hartwell. He's from a wealthy family that owns several car dealerships in Connecticut. The marriage lasted 2 years." Margaret handed me a yellowed newspaper clipping from a Connecticut paper dated 4 years ago. The headline read, "Local businessman granted restraining order against ex-wife." According to the court records, Lennox moved in with Richard's elderly mother shortly after their wedding. Within 6 months, she convinced Richard that his mother was becoming senile and needed to be placed in a care facility. She took control of the household finances and began isolating the older woman from friends and family. I felt a chill despite the warmth of the coffee shop. "What happened next?" I asked. "Richard's mother tried to warn him," Margaret said, "but Lennox was very skilled at making her complaints sound like the ramblings of a confused old woman. It wasn't until Richard discovered a $50,000 transfer from his mother's account to a business Lennox had started that he began to investigate." Margaret flipped the page, revealing bank statements showing how Lennox had been steadily draining his mother's savings while convincing Richard the money was going toward her care. When confronted, Lennox claimed his mother had given her permission. She said the old woman was grateful for her help and wanted to support her business ventures. The parallels with my own situation were terrifying. Did Richard believe her? I asked. "At first, yes," Margaret replied. "But then Richard's mother had a lucid moment in front of witnesses and made it clear she never authorized any transfers. Lennox had been forging her signature." I stared down at the papers, feeling like I was reading my own future written in another family's tragedy. "What happened to the mother?" "She passed away 6 months later, from a heart attack brought on by the stress of everything. Richard blames himself for not listening to her sooner." Margaret's voice softened but remained resolute. "He wanted me to warn other families about Lennox's pattern." "Pattern?" I echoed. "Yes. Richard did some digging after their divorce. Lennox has a history of targeting men with elderly or sick relatives. She presents herself as the perfect caregiver, moves in, then slowly takes control while isolating vulnerable family members." I thought about how quickly Lennox had moved into our house after marrying Darren, how she'd convinced him that I was a burden, that my opinions didn't matter, that I was just a lonely old woman to be managed, not respected. "There's more," Margaret said quietly. "Lennox is currently having an affair." The words hit me like a blow. "With who?" I asked. "A man named Trevor Walsh. He's a business consultant she hired 6 months ago. They meet at the Marriott downtown every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon." Margaret showed me hotel receipts, credit card statements, even photos taken by Richard's private investigator, who had been tracking his ex-wife. "She's using money from her business, your money, to fund these meetings. The consulting fees she pays him are about 3 times the normal rate, and most meetings happen in hotel rooms, not offices." I stared at the evidence, a strange mix of fury and relief washing over me. Anger at the betrayal, relief that I finally understood what I was up against. Lennox wasn't just a difficult daughter-in-law. She was a predator who'd chosen my family as her next victim. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Because Richard wanted you to know," Margaret said. He's seen this pattern destroy 3 families now. He can't stand by and watch it happen again. He's willing to testify if you need him, Margaret said. I gathered the documents, my hands steadier than I expected. What does he advise I do? He believes you should protect yourself, and your son, before it's too late. But, she paused, he also thinks Lennox has become careless. She's used to manipulating confused elderly people and sons who won't stand up to her. She's not prepared to face someone with the resources and wit to fight back. I left that coffee shop feeling as if I'd been handed a weapon I hadn't realized I needed. But I also knew that having information and knowing how to wield it were 2 very different things. That evening, I sat on my bed and dialed Darren's cell phone. Mom? Is everything all right? You never call my cell. I need you to come home early tomorrow. There's something important we have to discuss, about the loan. Should Lennox be there too? I glanced at the folder of evidence on my nightstand. Actually, I'd prefer to talk with you alone first. I want to make sure I understand everything clearly. Sure, Mom. Whatever you need. But what I really needed was for my son to finally see the truth about the woman he married, and tomorrow, I was going to make sure he couldn't look away any longer. Thursday afternoon, Darren arrived home early and found me in the kitchen baking his favorite cookies. For a brief moment, he looked like the little boy who used to rush home from school, eager to share his day. Something smells amazing, he said, settling into his usual seat at the kitchen table. You didn't have to bake for this talk, he added. It's no trouble. Serious talks always go better with comfort food, I replied, pouring him a glass of milk and setting a warm plate of cookies between us, just like when he was a child and we needed to have tough conversations. Mom, about the loan, he started, but I raised my hand to stop him. Before we talk about any loan, there are things you need to know about Lennox, about your marriage, and what's been happening in this house. I opened the folder Margaret had given me and laid the first document in front of him. Darren's face drained of color as he read the headline, Local Businessman Granted Restraining Order Against Ex-Wife. Mom, where did you get this? From someone who cares about our family. Someone who's seen Lennox ruin other families and couldn't stay silent any longer. I walked him through everything. The previous marriage, the pattern of preying on vulnerable elderly relatives, the isolation, the financial exploitation. With each piece of evidence, I watched Darren's expression shift from confusion, to disbelief, to something close to horror. This can't be real, he whispered, staring at the hotel receipts. Lennox wouldn't, he added. She loves me. Does she, sweetheart? When was the last time she stood up for you? When did she last put your feelings ahead of her own convenience? Darren was silent for a long moment, running his fingers through his hair, the same way he used to when struggling with tough homework. But the business meetings she has every Tuesday and Thursday at the Marriott, those aren't business meetings, Darren. They're affairs. Affairs? Yes. Lennox has been using company money, money that's been coming from your father's trust fund, to pay for hotel rooms where she meets her lover. Trust fund? Darren's eyes snapped up sharply. I took a deep breath. It was time for the final truth. Harold set up the Montgomery Trust before he died. It's been funding Lennox's business for the past 2 years. Every dollar she thought came from anonymous investors was actually from your father's legacy, the money I now control. Darren stared at me as if I'd just revealed I was a secret agent. You've been unknowingly financing Luminous Beauty until recently. Your father wanted to help you both succeed but also wanted you to feel independent. He never imagined his generosity would be met with disrespect toward his widow. I showed him the bank statements, trust documents, the proof that every comfort they'd enjoyed was built on Harold's money. Money that stopped flowing the day Lennox told me to eat in my room. The funding crisis they'd been panicking about? I continued. That happened because I pulled the support. I got tired of funding people who couldn't even show me basic respect in my own home. Darren's hands trembled as he put down the papers. Mom, I had no idea. I swear I never knew about any of this. I know you didn't, I said softly. But you did know how Lennox treated me, and you chose to let it happen. You chose her comfort over my dignity, again and again. Just then, we heard Lennox's car pull into the driveway. Darren's face went pale with panic. What do I do? How do I face her now, knowing all this? You don't have to do anything right now. Just watch, listen, and pay attention to how she acts when she thinks she's in control. Lennox burst through the front door, her voice echoing from the hallway. Darren, are you home? I have amazing news. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, practically glowing with excitement. Trevor found us new investors. Well, one major investor who wants to fund the entire expansion. We're meeting with him tomorrow to sign the contracts. I studied my son's face as he absorbed the news. Trevor, the man Lennox had been having an affair with, was now supposedly bringing investors for the business. The same business already funded by money she'd never even known existed. That's great, Darren said cautiously. Who is this investor? Someone Trevor has worked with before. Very private, very exclusive. He wants to stay anonymous, but he's ready to invest $200,000. $200,000. More than the trust had given over 2 years. I couldn't help but wonder where this mysterious money was truly coming from, and what Lennox was promising in return. We'll finally be able to expand properly, Lennox went on, then noticed me sitting at the table. Her smile vanished instantly, replaced by a hard glare. Ramona, did you decide about co-signing that loan? Because if this other investor comes through, we might not even need it. Actually, I said calmly, I have made a decision. I won't be co-signing any loans. Lennox's smile faltered. Why not? Because I don't believe your business model is sustainable. What would you know about business models? Lennox snapped, her mask slipping completely. You've never worked a day in the corporate world. You don't understand the first thing about building a company. Darren cleared his throat. Actually, Lennox, Mom has been more involved in your business than you realize. Something in his tone froze Lennox in place. What do you mean? Tell her. Mom, Darren said quietly, tell her where the money really came from. I stood slowly, savoring the way Lennox's confident facade started to crack. The Montgomery Trust has been funding Luminous Beauty since the beginning. Every anonymous investor, every mysterious transfer, every dollar you thought came from strangers, all of it came from my husband's estate. Money I control. Lennox's face drained of color. That's impossible. Is it? I asked. Did you ever wonder why legitimate investors suddenly lost interest when the funding stopped? Or why no one could give you contact information for your so-called backers? I opened another folder, this one holding copies of every transfer, every payment, every single dollar that had flowed from the trust to her business. 2 years, Lennox, 2 years of building your dreams with my money, while treating me like I was worthless, having an affair with Trevor, and using my funds to pay for hotel rooms. Lennox's mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. Finally, she turned to Darren. You can't believe this nonsense. She's just a bitter old woman jealous of our success. But Darren was already standing, hotel receipts clenched in his hand. Is this nonsense too? He asked. These receipts for the Marriott, these charges to the business account for consulting fees that happen to line up with your Tuesday and Thursday afternoon disappearances? The fight drained from Lennox all at once. She slumped against the doorframe, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked her age. I want you out, Darren said quietly. Pack your things and leave tonight. Lennox tried to argue, tried to explain, tried to manipulate one last time, but the evidence was overwhelming, and Darren had finally seen through her act. She left that night with 2 suitcases and her car. No threats, no demands, no dramatic exit, just the quiet defeat of someone whose game had been exposed. After she was gone, Darren and I sat in the kitchen again. The house felt bigger, lighter without her shadow. Mom, he said, I owe you the biggest apology of my life. You don't owe me anything, sweetheart, I replied. You were manipulated by someone very skilled at it. But I should have seen it. I should have protected you. I reached across the table and took his hand. You were protecting your marriage. That's what good husbands do. You just didn't know you were married to someone who didn't deserve that protection. 3 months later, Darren moved back into his childhood room while sorting out the divorce and figuring out his next steps. It wasn't the life either of us had planned, but it was honest, in a way our lives hadn't been for years. I kept the Montgomery Trust but used it differently, smarter. Harold's money went to causes that honored his memory. Scholarships for young people, support for elderly victims of financial abuse, and a secure future for the son who had found his way back to me. Lennox vanished from our lives completely. I heard through Margaret she'd relocated to Florida and was already targeting a new family. I thought about warning them but realized some people only believe the truth when they discover it themselves. On quiet evenings, Darren and I would cook dinner and eat at the dining room table, talking about our days like we used to when he was a boy. My voice no longer grated, my presence was no longer unwelcome. I'd found my power. More importantly, I'd found my voice again, in my own home, at my own table, with my son who remembered how to see me as more than just an obstacle. The empire Harold built was still mine, but now I ruled it wisely. Now, I'm curious about you, the one listening to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you been through something similar? Comment below. And before you go, on the final screen, I'm leaving 2 other stories, channel favorites, that will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching.